the main question I think about Abelard's theory is, does it really explain how we're reconciled to God? Suppose I am inspired by Christ's example, as I assume all Christians would say they are. How exactly does that put me right with God? I've got my past sins, they are what they are, my present sins, and I'm not going to get perfect here, even if I get better. So how exactly does it work? Okay, I become a little bit more holy, a little bit more loving maybe, as the case may be, but that seems to leave open a lot of questions about the ongoing sin and past sin and so on. A second question is, there are many inspiring examples in our lives, and I think some people may feel actually more inspired by somebody that they've known that lived here on earth with them, maybe a grandfather or an uncle, or somebody that they've known that had a big influence on them. So what makes Christ's work here different in kind? Shouldn't there be something very special about it? Now, maybe one response would be, well, these other examples may be inspirational, but they're never perfect. And Christ is the only perfect example, so that surely puts Christ in a special category. But now that seems to me to lead to a different kind of question. How was he able to be perfect? Well, I assume that's got something to do with his divinity. He's got resources that the rest of us don't have. And for many people, and I think I'm one of them, that in a way reduces the inspirational effect, because I'm thinking, yeah, he's God, that's kind of different. So you kind of loop through a series of questions there that make me wonder whether it really fundamentally about this inspiring example. If the whole purpose of Christ's coming, or the central purpose, was this inspiring example, another question is, well then you would think that people who know the most about Christ's life would stand out as examples of love and holiness, right? But then Christians around the world know more about Christ in general than the non-Christians, right? The Buddhists and the Hindus and so on. Generally speaking, they hear a lot more about it. And so do they stand out as the saints of the world? Well, I'm not a sociologist or an anthropologist, and I haven't done a study on it, but my guess is that most people would say, well, it's the same all over. You've got Mahatma Gandhi, he's a wonderful sort of saint of the Hindu tradition, but then you've got your middle-level Hindus, and you've got some bad apples in there too, and it's the same thing for Christians, right? We've got our saints, and we've got strugglers there in the middle somewhere, and we've got a few of these people that say they're Christians and simply don't come anywhere near to living by it. So it seems odd, if that was the whole purpose, that we don't see Christians just standing forth as the noteworthy, holy lovers of the world. And the last question, what's the resurrection? How does the resurrection come into this theory? The example is up to the time of death, and you might even ask, how does the death come in? Now, I think Abelard would probably say, well, it shows the extent of his willingness to live for God, to accept his horrible death, all right? But the resurrection isn't part of that life lived to inspire this holy living. So what purpose is it? Well, the only thing that can be said, as far as I know, and we'll see this is true of some of the other theories, the resurrection signals God's approval of the work already done. That's its main function. It's a signal for divine approval of what Christ has done. My question at that point is that really that's what the resurrection. It doesn't have a more central role. It's just a kind of a signal of the real work of atonement that was already done. I would like to see a theory that put the resurrection more nearly at the center of the action as really doing the work of the atonement. Yes.
It reminds me of the verse. It reminds me of the verse that says, "If you die with him, then you will live with him." That there's some sort of, the best way I can think of it is a channel opening. That by Christ's death, there is nowhere that God is not, and so as He comes into our death, then we come into His life.
Yes. Okay, and that's of course a Christian teaching throughout the New Testament. Yeah.
But I think where it comes down to the atonement theory is that it's making an electrical connection that magnetizes us, so that, how can I put it? So that if we're a bunch of iron filings that are disorganized and chaotic and have no alignment, that Christ can come into our midst as a sort of magnet that's making this connection between death and life, then all of us as iron filings next to Christ's magnet kind of snap into place
Okay.
in these like curved lines,
Okay.
sort of following Christ. I mean, it's sort of like it's not a moral influence as much as it is like an energy influence or like a physical
Okay.
influence.
You're going to propose the magnet theory of the atonement.
Electromagnetism.
I'm going to be searching the scriptures to see if I can find that reference to a magnet in there somewhere. Yeah, that's great. Yes.
And Abelard's theory doesn't really talk about corporate sin. It feels to me like it's individual sin. And certainly from our own confession, we pray for things we have done, things that we have not done, and in the modern version for things that we have allowed to happen that are corporate.
Yes.
And I don't think Abelard addresses that.
And you've just referenced something that I think is very important. I think we do tend often in our churches, and forgive me if maybe I'm wrong about this, maybe I'm just indicating my own shallow thought, but I think it's very common to think about basically it's our individual sins, we've got to get those forgiven, so we're going to be okay. But as I see it, sin is kind of a culture. There's a kind of a culture of sin. And what separates us from God isn't only that we've done wrong things. I mean, that's definitely true and important. But there's a whole set of attitudes that we can have. So, I mean, I know so many people who resent God because of the suffering in the world. I mean, the problem of evil, which we discuss in philosophy quite a lot, is the major objection many people give for not believing in God at all. And for some people, that's just, why the danger, why the suffering? God's a God of love. What's going on here? There's a fear, I think, that good won't triumph over evil in the end. All I have to do is listen to the news. It sounds like the bad guys are winning half the time, right? So there's a whole series of attitudes like that, including a deep fear we have that we won't be forgiven. In some cases, I think a fear that God is out to get us, or at least indifferent to us. So just a whole series of things, and that's part of what I want to try. I want to try to focus more on those things, not just about individual sins. I think you make a good point. I think we're about.
Oh, well, just a minute. We have about a minute left or two. I was wondering about liberation theology, and if you had looked into that as part of your study, because it deals with the struggles of people, and it immediately makes me think of Pope Francis talking about the mercy of God everywhere, and especially on the peripheries and those in the margins,
Yes.
reminded of Jesus and of Martin Luther King and so forth.
No, that's a great point, and I can't say I'm learned about the liberation theologies, but I think that they clearly do stress the structural nature of evil, and that those social structures have to be addressed as part of our struggle for good and against evil in the world. I think we probably should stop here for today.
Well, this is really very interesting, Steve, and thank you so much. Steve will return next week, same time, same place, and I hope all of you are here and great friends and others who might be intrigued. Thank you very much.